Hey, and welcome back to Ask a Monk. Today's question comes from Cthulhu Flux, who asks, Hi, I find it easy to be compassionate to beings that are weaker, less fortunate than me. Compassion is less forthcoming from me for those better off than me. I understand this is wrong practice on my part. How do I separate compassion from pity? Compassion from pity. Well, first of all, as I said before in one of my videos, that there are really two ways of approaching the whole love, compassion, sympathy, and equanimity thing. These are meditations in their own right, and you can practice them to develop these things if you feel yourself lacking in them. But they are not considered, not in the tradition that I follow, to be crucial or essential parts of the practice. And the reason being that we look at it the other way. The development of wisdom is the most important, and a person who is wise necessarily has love, compassion, sympathy, and equanimity. These states are the natural state of being. Not necessarily in the active sense, though they arise spontaneously in someone who is wise. They exist at all times in the sense of not being angry or upset or cruel or jealous or disturbed. So they exist in their neutral state of being always friendly, of being always helpful, and so on. So they spring naturally, and in their active state as well. For a person who is enlightened, it comes easily. It's very easy to be actively loving and kind and compassionate. So, as a part of the path or the development of oneself, they should be used in tandem with insight meditation. I wouldn't ever recommend to just develop compassion or just develop loving kindness. If you're not developing insight, then you're still developing something based on delusion, and it's going to it's just going to lead you around in circles. At best, it can lead you to a very focused and calm state of being. It can lead you to be a kind and compassionate being on a conventional level, but for a temporary period of time. It's not based on wisdom, whereas with wisdom, you never, these things never go away. So I just to get that clear, I've said that before, but you don't have to worry so much about your inability to develop compassion, because it comes naturally through the development of wisdom. That's much more important. Okay, but it can be a useful addition, a practice that we use, and it's important to understand compassion, since it is a quality of mind of wise people. So, your observation that it's easier to be compassionate towards beings who are weaker or less fortunate than you is correct, and that's according to the texts. One of the texts that I always draw my answers from, or quite often draw my answers from, is this book. It's called The Path of Purification, and there's the author. This edition, it's an ancient text. It was written, they say, about 1,500 years ago, and it's based on even earlier sources. This edition is printed in Taiwan by these guys, and it's distributed for free. Now, as a monk, they send me a whole bunch of them, but I don't know whether they'd send these to ordinary people or how that works. But it's the corporate body of the Buddha Educational Foundation, and I recommend this book for a lot of the questions that I'm being asked. For if you have these sorts of questions that are to do with early Buddhism or orthodox basics of Buddhism, then this is an excellent book. So in this book, it talks about the these four states of compassion, and let's see if I can find it here. they have their limits, and they have their I'm not going to find it here. Yeah, here we are. Okay, so compassion, for someone who wants to develop compassion, the first thing they should do is focus on someone who is suffering. This is correct. This is because it's easy. Now, it doesn't mean that compassion is this feeling of pity towards a person, but this seeing someone suffering is the easiest way to evoke these feelings. It's because it's natural in us, because it's something that is very easy. If you see someone, and here's the example, someone who is unsightly, reduced to utter misery, with hands and feet cut off, sitting in the shelter for the helpless, with a pot placed before him, with a mass of maggots oozing from his arms and legs, and moaning. Compassion should be felt for him in this way. This being has indeed been reduced to misery, if only he could be freed from this suffering. Because here it's really easy to see the person suffering, and it's really easy to understand and to feel pity for the person. Now, this is only one part of what the meaning of the word compassion, and the text goes on to talk about how you can evoke the same feelings towards someone who is not suffering. Very easily to evoke it towards someone who is an evil person. That's generally someone who is unpleasant, someone who you don't like, someone who is undear to you, someone who you have a problem with, and you think they're doing all sorts of terrible bad things. And for that sort of person, it's also quite easy. It's relatively easy to develop compassion towards them. You'd start with someone you love, but eventually you develop it towards someone you don't like, because you know that in the future they're going to fall into suffering. But this is not the essential quality of compassion. Compassion arises. Its characteristic is promoting the aspect of allaying suffering. Its function resides in not bearing other suffering, and it's manifested as non-cruelty. So the manifestation, the way compassion appears, or the way it expresses itself, is by not being cruel. And this comes about through understanding suffering. When you see someone who's in terrible amount of suffering, you say, yeah, I get it, and I've suffered, and I understand these coarse types of suffering. But when you practice insight meditation, this is why it's so important to have it develop it in tandem with insight meditation. You are able to understand much more clearly what gives rise to suffering. So when you see someone who's doing evil deeds, you feel pity for them because you know that what they're going through. And moreover, because you've experienced suffering, you don't wish it for anyone, so your actions reflect this, your speech reflects this. You wouldn't want to do something that gives rise to suffering in others, and this is the most important part of suffering, this non-cruelty. It's actually a negative state. It's in the sense of not being an expression. It's the absence of something, the absence of cruelty. Whenever you speak with someone, it's free from the barbs, it's free from the poison. You never have this desire to hurt other people. And this is what I meant by enlightened people. Though not always constantly working to alleviate people's suffering, they have compassion in the sense of not wanting to hurt others. And so even if they don't do anything, they have this, at the times when they're sleeping, at the times when they're not involved with other beings, they still have this sense of not wanting to hurt others. There's this absence of the desire to hurt others. So what you're really trying to accomplish here, when you look at someone who's suffering, when you think of someone who's doing evil deeds or so on, is this state of non-cruelty, to get to the point where you would never want to hurt other beings, where you're no longer angry. When people do other things, you feel sorry for them. You know that they're going to suffer. And you never feel irritated, and you never feel cruel. You never want to hurt others. This is the meaning of what is compassion, and it comes directly from wisdom. So rather than trying to develop it as according to this book, which it does give you very detailed a method in terms of its development, I would recommend as a higher practice to develop wisdom and to give up cruelty, to be able to be free from cruelty. And in that way, whenever you see people suffering, because of your understanding of suffering and your natural aversion towards causing suffering in others, you will shy away from hurting others, and you'll feel compassion right away and want to help people be free from suffering, because you understand it, because you've experienced it, and because you know how you have a very keen sense of the truth of suffering. Okay, so in this sense, it's no, the state of compassion has no bearing on whether someone is bad off, someone is well off. It's a state of non-cruelty, a state of wishing to help people who are in suffering and not wishing to hurt people who are not. It's our interaction that is totally in harmony and is free from this evil that is for most of us a reality, where we do hurt other people, where we do try to get the better of them, where we do things that are going to cause them suffering, sometimes just out of absolute cruelty, sometimes because we want something and we're not afraid to hurt others to get the things that we want. So that is my understanding of compassion, and I think it's very much based on the truth of meditation practice. Okay, thanks for the question. Keep practicing.